Alright, what's good, you guys? So, first round, US Open, over the course of the last 3 days now, in the books, and, well, really, as of day one alone, it was quite noteworthy, not only for the first of its kind Sunday start at the US Open, but, of course, the last match of the day. Certainly will go down in infamy in the history books for at least the foreseeable future. And don't worry, we will get to that. But also in this video, like I said, as promised, I was going to divulge my predictions. And now that we're here, also might as well just talk the rundown on round one. I thought today far and away the dullest slate, of first round matches across these first 3 days of the tournament, particularly after Iga and Jannik led off today's proceedings. And of course, while not at all unexpected that both of them just bulldozed through their matches in short order, that definitely made that lull in the middle of the day all the more pronounced. On the men's side, I thought the standout today was Alexander Bublik. I had my eyes on that match today with Bublik and Cilic, especially with both guys coming in on highs, but both guys also not having played in a while. Cilic since Wimbledon, Bublik since bagging the second of his two 250 titles post-Wimbledon this year, both of which were on clay, actually. So, confidence aside with bagging those trophies, not really all that relevant to his US Open performance, but both guys, while not opting into any hardcourt tune-up leading into this US Open, were coming off of highs. Bublik playing so well going back to this spring, arguably the best of his career, and then Marin, probably his best showing in years, with his run at Wimbledon to the fourth round, beating Draper, of course, and then Munar making it all the way to the fourth round, losing to Kaboli. And so I really thought, that was going to be a good one. I did have Bublik winning, but definitely did not expect it to be one-way traffic, which is what it was. And throughout the course of this match, actually, start to finish, this was the new and improved Alexander Bublik that people were expecting, had high hopes for going into Wimbledon. And to be fair, Munar was a tough draw out of the gates for Bublik. Obviously, a lot of expectations on his shoulders after the Hala title and all the success he'd been experiencing. And once he was unable to serve out that match in the fourth set, it fell apart pretty quickly. But new and improved Alexander Bublik was on full display, in full flow, in this opener, this time around at the US Open. Throughout the course of this match, Cilic had 2 break points, I think, mid-first set, and Bublik erased them both, I want to say, with big serves. And that was the theme throughout the course of this match. You can look no further than one stat in this match, Bublik losing all of 2 points in the entirety of this match on his first serve. I believe 42 of 44. And yeah, throughout the course of this match, Marin just could not touch him on serve. There was one other opening with a love 30 early in the third, but that was about it. And you could just feel it was one of those matches where one player was just executing on so much higher of a plane, and that's not because Cilic was particularly awful in this match. I thought he just looked overmatched and was just having to live on a knife's edge as far as just margins for execution, because the pressure, conversely, in his service games was just so much more apparent. It very much looked like a guy operating somewhere near the peak of his abilities versus a 37-year-old. Realistically, with what Bublik brought to the table today, I feel like Marin probably would have had to be executing somewhere near the peak of his abilities, bringing that mythical peak Marin Cilic form, the way that he did at Wimbledon against Draper, for him to have a chance here, and he just wasn't there. But with that Bublik performance, I look ahead. I mean, he or Tommy Paul is the projected opponent for Jannik Sinner in the fourth round. And listen, Bublik's never loved really hard courts in general, or either hard court slam in particular. He's actually over 500 for his career at both Roland Garros and Wimbledon after this year. He is sub 500 at both Australia and the US Open. Best result is second round and third round, respectively. But with a Tommy Paul, whose health still seems up in the air, or at the very least, if he is healthy again, he definitely does not seem like he's built back up into the Tommy Paul that he was before the injury at Roland Garros. And given that, Bublik's confident, Bublik's in great form, and he's been away for a while. As it is, you don't expect as much from him on hard courts as you did during grass court season. Expectations won't be at a high in the same way, nor will they be a factor in the same way that they were heading into Wimbledon this year, of course, off his Halle title and that great Roland Garros run. I think there's a legit great shot for him potentially to make it second week here. He is playing the best tennis of his career, and we saw it at Roland Garros. We've seen it, in these two clay 250s for what they're worth. I know he didn't play, top-tier opposition or anything resembling it, but, just his elevated ability and competence from the baseline in addition to this world-beating serve. It's going to translate to every surface. He should have a better shot to make career best runs everywhere that he goes moving forward, assuming that newfound security or added dimension of his game from the baseline is here to stay after switching rackets back in the spring. That aside, a couple of really entertaining five-setters out there on the outer courts today with Medvedev and Altmaier. Daniel Altmaier, of course, the victor there, and this is just what Daniel Altmaier does, right? Typically when we're hearing from him, it's him making some noise in the early rounds of Grand Slams. The other one, of course, seeing a minor upset, I think, with the Tristan School kid taking out Lorenzo Sonego in a fifth set breaker. Sonego, another guy that finds his way into these box office early round matches often as well. Francisco Cerundolo getting a much-needed victory. It really feels like his season has just combusted upon itself after an awesome clay court season before unceremoniously being shown the door at the big one at Roland Garros by, again, a tough first-round draw on Gab Diallo. But things certainly did not seem to be looking up here. Matteo Arnaldi was dominating him for 2.5 sets, was even up 3-1 in the third, and saw a break point at 5-all, but Cerundolo really able to dig deep, and that's the type of victory that, can be a bit of a gut check and really sort of turn things around here for Cerundolo, who in addition to having a rough go of it, also got injured in his match with Zverev in Canada as well. A lot of bad juju coming into this event for him, but gets a quality win over a very, very tough opening opponent. And then the last person I do want to talk about is Stefanos Tsitsipas getting what seems like, you would have to say, a massive first-round win victory. We know what kind of year it has been for Tsitsipas. Hasn't won back-to-back matches since Barcelona. Slam results coming into this one were first round, second round, first round for the season. He himself had also dealt with some injury problems throughout the course of the year. The back, again, flaring up for him during grass court season. And all of that coming into a stretch of season with North American hardcourt swing that has, even at his very best, always been, at the very least, a mixed bag, with him making the finals of Toronto in 2018, Cincinnati 2022, a couple semis in 2021, but also consistently seeing the U.S. Open be his worst major. He's only been to the third round as his best result, and across 3 tune-up events this year, of course, came in with 1 match win, that coming in Cincinnati, but sort of immediately after, maybe even hitting a little bit of a rock bottom moment, losing and getting battered in Winston-Salem, which he took a wild card into. falling 3-2 at the hands of Bu Yunxiao, who made a lot of noise in Asia last year. I believe semis in Beijing, but hadn't really heard much from him since. I don't think he's had a particularly great year this season, but he just destroyed Tsitsipas and Winston-Salem. And that made this first round match for Tsitsipas against Alexandre Muller, who has enjoyed a career best year and always seems to be a tough out for pretty much anybody dealt with him in the early rounds. It made this match a bit of a pick'em, if not calling for an easy upset alert for Stef. And admittedly, I did not get to watch any of this match, but just looking at the outcome, looking at the numbers, obviously down a set, stuff was going according to schedule for how vulnerable Tsitsipas has looked of late. But, going from that to really dominating most of the rest of the match and it appearing to be quite the tidy performance. I did have him getting through this match in my bracket, but I didn't think that he could go beyond round 2. I did have Medvedev playing him, and I think right now a big hitter still would have been a tough out for Stefanos. But I do feel like for a guy that plays such an all-court game that definitely can finish at net and won't be as troubled by Altmaier's defense, won't allow as many points to reset from Altmaier defensive positions the way that Medvedev did a lot today, that's a good matchup for Stefanos. I would favor him to get through that, and I think there's a real opportunity here to definitely put in the best result for him since Dubai, winning that title. At the very least, match that career best US Open result in the third round, and very, very low-key, you look ahead. If he is able to get past Altmaier, which I wouldn't say is a guarantee, but I would back him to do so. While I wouldn't back him to beat de Minaur right now, nor Khachanov, those are two opponents that could be on deck afterwards. And if you don't know the head-to-heads between Tsitsipas and those guys, those are very, very comfortable matchups for him historically. So, for as awful and dismal a year as it has been for him, there is on the lowest of keys an opening here for him. Most of us probably weren't even looking that far ahead for him, but it must be said, he is historically lifetime a combined 20-2, 11-1, and 9-1 against Alex de Minaur and Karen Khachanov respectively, which I think really makes for some real intrigue with his prospects moving forward. Of course, you go one match at a time, you have to, with how Tsitsipas has played the most of this season, but something to keep an eye out for. But what else happened round 1? Day 2, obviously Alcaraz's shaved head stole the headlines, as they typically do whenever Carlos gets a haircut, because as it is, none of us were particularly happy with Victor Barber's work. But hey, I guess Victor Barber always has a vision, even if initially it looks like a bit of like a downward spear on the back of his head. It always ends up coming back together 2-3 weeks later, fade looking quite crisp. I guess Victor Barber just plays the long game, but the rationale of which having Alvaro, Carlos's brother, cut his hair just did not check out, saying New York is too far for Victor. Brother, do you know that you're loaded? Fly him out if it's that deep. But that aside, Baldcaraz looked phenomenal on court as far as the tennis went. And, this was a big name. This was a first round a lot of people had circled, Alcaraz Opelka, who on his day, and it is a very specific on his day for Riley Opelka because most of the time he's hitting his forehand, just slapping and praying. And certain days, like the Djokovic match in Brisbane, like the de Minaur match in Cincinnati, once in a blue moon, he will have the type of forehand day where it's connecting, and it doesn't matter how fast you are, you're just not getting to it. And on those days, he's certainly a nightmare to handle. Of course, I think Riley was actually pretty good in this first round match. Didn't have that forehand day, but also against a less locked-in Alcaraz on the day, he probably does get that second set. But anyways, just playing the percentages about him having that type of forehand day, I wasn't really looking at this match as, much danger for Carlos. I felt like tops Opelka would get a set, and that would be the type of set where Alcaraz just gets bored. Certainly, there were the openings for that midway deep into the second set, as well as very early on in the third. But for the most part, Carlos has locked in an early round match as I've seen since like 2023. Had a golden serving set without dropping a point the entirety of the first, and even when those pressure situations came about, he was calm, cool, collected. Didn't offer up too many openings as it is, and when they were there, they were mostly well saved, well handled, and yeah, I continue to be very high on what I've seen from Alcaraz since Wimbledon. I'll be flashing up my predictions throughout the course of this video on screen, but obviously I do have him going very deep, as he has been going in every event since clay court season. There was a lot of buzz, and the draw revealed that there were quite a few big names that Alcaraz could see along the way, but realistically, first off, Carlos is just like tiers above all of those pre-quarterfinal potential matchups. And secondly, the potential with Daniil Medvedev won't even happen now. But 2025 Medvedev, and that's the one in particular where it's like the name overrides how much of a threat he was at all, ever. So, Carlos's tournament, regardless, starts in the quarterfinal to me. And he gets his campaign off to a great start.
Holger Rune also got a win on day one in another enticing round one matchup between him and Botic van de Zandschulp, who always seems to be able to call upon his best tennis against the biggest names, especially as of late, but Holger able to get through in tight straights, and also I think he likes Stefanos Tsitsipas, a great opportunity here to make a career-best U.S. Open run. Has historically easily been his worst slam, 1-4 coming into this event, lifetime at the U.S. Open. Never really holding up great in general this time of year to the conditions during the North American hardcourt summer, but he is now working with Marco Panici, and track record for his work speaks for itself. Could see Holger a little bit more resistant, to that factor already. But the defining match for him here really will come down to the third round if he can get by Francis Tiafoe, who the last couple years, of course, has been very reliable to play his best tennis at this particular event. They could see each other third round before what I think will probably be the winner will get what I believe will be the deciding match for the quarter in round 4 against Novak Djokovic. But that also a decent ways away. Out of day 2, we can't go without mentioning Venus Williams, of course, all summer long, really demonstrating the merits of her wild cards, even at age 45. It's been a couple of years, right, of just wondering what is driving her to stick around, all the while taking a decent amount of injuries in the last couple of years as well. Of course, you have to be of the mindset of legends deserve to call it when they want to call it, especially when you mean as much to the sport here in the States as Venus Williams does. And you always have to say, right, like, if they're still enjoying it, that's all you can ask for. And obviously that is a lot harder said than done, because us as fans, you're always just dreading, we're ruining the records, we're ruining the stats, which is ultimately, that's what fans do. That's only of concern to us. But that aside, against Karolina Muchova, just as far as the tennis goes, and scoring the win earlier this summer over Peyton Stearns, I thought Venus showed that, this is still a game that is worth investing in, and that if the will is still there and she still wants to put in the hard yards every now and then to get back out on the match courts, obviously at that age is definitely still a thing and is seen in some capacity or the other. But this summer certainly showed that there is still a little something in the tank. She was competitive in almost every match she played this summer, not being match fit at all. So all in all, just a really feel-good moment out of this U.S. Open for her. Shout out Venus Williams. And then, of course, day one, I thought rousing success. It was great that the U.S. Open actually dialed up a really great slate of matches for opening day if they were going to stretch it out over 3 days. And obviously, I thought the third day was the one that suffered. But opening day was electric. A lot of great names out there. Shelton, Cruz, and I think is poised to do big things, put in a great showing for himself at this year's U.S. Open as a continuation of this summer, being a step forward in his evolution as a player. Fritz taking care of business on Armstrong, straight setting Emilio Nava. I think that he has a great look to go to the quarterfinals again, give himself a chance to defend to some extent those finals points from last year. Really, the only vision I could see of him not making the quarter is if, like, Mensik, Mahach, or potentially Fonseca, if he were to get there. Though best of 5, I don't know if he'd have the fitness by that point. Mainly just Mensik or Mahach. If either of those guys, like, peaks to the max of their abilities, potentially round 4, they could certainly have a puncher's chance to knock him off before that, but I think he's a pretty strong favorite to make the quarterfinal here. And then, of course, we got to talk about Djokovic. A lot of intrigue, of course, starting with him anticipated to wear the all-black fit in the nightcap. And, I mean, the all-black under the lights on Ash, it's never missed before. Always looks super crisp, but also there was a lot of intrigue as to how he would look in Lerner Tien out of the gates. And as far as Novak, as the 7th seed and having no lead-up or prep to this U.S. Open, I think this draw is about as good as it could get. Obviously not an ideal first round, but now that he's through and straights at that, I think that's huge. Did he look great against Tien? I think after the first set, for the most part, no. But, there was always going to be rust. We've seen it the last couple of years, 2021, 2024, when those were Olympic years. Djokovic also came into the U.S. Open with no prep, not opting to play the tune-ups. And so with Tien being that type of grinder archetype that was just going to backboard against him, I saw a vision where, he could take a set. I didn't ever think Novak was going to lose. Thought best case for Lerner could be just getting Novak on one of those days where the timing isn't there on the groundies, and he just leaks unforced errors, and he gets it somehow to like a 5th set in a similar way that Simone did at the Australian Open. But never did I think he was going to win the match because, he just doesn't have the weapons to do so against Novak. And that definitely showed. There was a window there for him for most of the second set where Djokovic really looked like the legs were screaming and the lack of match fitness was showing. And that really was the window of opportunity to make it into that type of ugly match for Lerner. And he was unable to capitalize. All in all, even though I did think Tien was drawing dead to win the match going in, still would say a bit of an underwhelming showing out of him, especially in the last couple of years. You look at the young guys that have gotten looks at Djokovic just this year, Nishesh Basavaredi in Australia, Jaime Faria as well, way back when in 2021, Holger Rune on this court against Novak, etc., etc. But on the Djokovic end of things, given how he's looked in the past couple of years when he has come in cold turkey, you expected rust. And again, the draw he has as a 7 seed, he's going to have a couple matches to play himself into, I think, at least good enough form. Honestly, I wasn't expecting coming into this tournament to be very high on Novak, mostly for that reason of him having to build up match fitness and match reps over the course of this tournament. And I thought that would leave him a little vulnerable. But his draw, I honestly think that there's only one match there that can pick him off early, and I think it'll have to be early because if he gets to the quarterfinal, he loves the matchup with Fritz. I just can't see Fritz beating him once we get that far into the tournament. I think the one match that someone could pick him off is like a peaking Francis Tiafoe or Holger Rune in the 4th round, both of which have their drawbacks to argue otherwise. But I mean, that's the only danger match I see for him. And on his end, in the Tien match, you gotta give him credit because this is what, under the radar, Djokovic has become a real master of in this late career stage of his career, really throughout the course of his 30s, is that he's become a master of manipulating the flow and pace of matches. He knows exactly when to turn it up, and he will straight up punt portions of matches if he needs to, just looking at the bigger picture. In a way, this match sort of reminded me of the 2023 final where Medvedev had that window to make it into a real struggle and make Novak suffer physically in the confines of a best-of-5 match in that second set. And Tien had the same situation, albeit now it's relative. I mean, Novak was playing at a much higher level then, but situationally similar. And for example, you look at the 3rd round against Musetti at Roland Garros last year. That was the match that pretty much threw everything off for him at the tournament last year, having to engage in such a physical match, play so late. Musetti actually took advantage of that window and came out on top, and you just have to with old Novak Djokovic when you have those chances and have him down a little bit. And in that sort of match, when that opportunity is taken advantage of, that's where you'll see Djokovic like ease off the gas a little bit for like a set or so, just because he knows at this age he cannot be dialed in all the time. But he knows exactly when to lock in. He will do whatever it takes, be a chameleon according to the situation, according to how he needs to play. And so I think that makes it huge that he came out of that match unscathed, came through that slight moment of vulnerability in the second set, allows for a match where, honestly, it doesn't matter, how he played. No other player moving forward, I think, is really going to get at his legs the way a Tien would. Most guys in his draw are just not going to even play that way in a way that is trying to drain him of energy. And for Djokovic to come through that round one the way he did, it's really just a survive and advance situation. You're just happy to get out of that one without expending as much energy as you could have. But saving the best for last, if you can call it that, really an all-time moment here. Another episode of Medvedev on Armstrong, 6 years after the initial, now much more endearing, especially by the end of that tournament, inciting moment on Louis Armstrong with Daniil Medvedev when he really made it a point to antagonize the crowd and rile them up in a really tight and fiery match with Feliciano Lopez. Then, this time, round one against Benjamin Bonzi, rematch of their Wimbledon match that also saw Medvedev upset in the first round. A match where, despite 2 tiebreaks, he pretty comprehensively outplayed Daniil, and for much of this match, he was outplaying Daniil even more so. I mean, Medvedev didn't even see a break point until Benjamin Bonzi was serving out the second set, and then I believe through most of the third set, again, wasn't really putting much pressure on the Bonzi serve until Bonzi was serving for the set and match at that point. That initial chance for Medvedev coming 30-40, like immediately before the inciting incident that this match will go down in history for, that will, for good or bad, expand the lore of Daniil Medvedev at the US Open. Well, I guess you would have to say bad, honestly, with the outcome. But throughout the course of that match, I mean, the standout was just how much Medvedev was missing. And that's pretty much in every single facet, no matter how he tried to play. And for much of this match, it did feel like, especially through the early phase of the match, Medvedev was sort of panicking
and really trying to force the issue in a way that, while he was a better player, he has executed on in a couple of big spots, but it just is not natural to him. And right now, with his confidence shattered, just all the more pronounced that it is not natural to him. And then even when he tried to wall up and play the backboard version of Daniil Medvedev, missing a lot more from that position as well, whether it be retrieval deep in the court or even off return of serves, just totally a shell of the player that, forget 2019 to 2023, I mean, that's so far out of the realm of comparison right now. Even the guy that he was 12 months ago right now, where he wasn't playing great, but even after Australia last year, these were still reasonably deep in the tournament at the slams afterwards, and his worst loss at the slams afterwards was to De Minaur, who was just outside the top 10 at Roland Garros. And even that was enough to roll through the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open last year and still take a set off of Jannik Sinner in what ultimately wasn't that competitive a match. But if you put current Medvedev up against Sinner, I don't know that he sees an extended set. And he is probably lucky to see the 2-hour mark, honestly. Really just emblematic of just how drastic the drop-off has been this season for him. Obviously, the most telling being that his slam results this year will read 1 win, and slam results of second round, first round, very clearly rock bottom right now for Daniil Medvedev, and this match was just going to be a footnote, an extension of just the dire state of affairs of his game right now, just being taken to school by Benjamin Bonzi throughout the course of this match. And then, of course, 5-4, add in, it happened. I have no idea what this photographer was thinking, but he ran onto the court in between Bonzi's first and second serve after he missed the first. Greg Allensworth, of course, issuing a let and a first serve for Bonzi, and Medvedev just blew his fuse, and you can understand the frustration, especially given the timing, him really being on the ropes at that point, and yeah, you can watch it back and, feel like it was so quick that maybe it didn't garner a let and Bonzi getting a first serve there, and that's fine, but it is literally a judgment call, and in the moment, it's not egregious at all for Allensworth to call it the other way, call it a let. So I can understand it both ways. I mean, Daniil, probably everything just boiling over and some genuine just rage, which that call was a tipping point for, but very quickly on, at a certain point, it seemed to transcend into gamesmanship and stalling out as long as he could to cause a disruption, to cause a distraction, egging the crowd on Armstrong on. This time, unlike 2019, them actually getting behind him for his cause, in echoing his outrage for the call of a let. And obviously it goes on so long, all of a sudden, we're over 5 minutes later after the photographer rushed on. In the middle there, the crowd is chanting second serve, just total pandemonium, and I know a lot of people will find the actions of the crowd trashy and whatnot, and say what you want, but there is no tennis crowd in the world where something would happen like that. Maybe other than a Davis Cup tie, but other than that, no other venue where something like this would even be possible. And yeah, it goes against all the traditional principles of decorum in tennis and whatnot. But I don't think you can deny, it made for some spectacle here. And everyone can make of it what they want. I really think it's an added layer of buzz and intrigue. And it is the reason this match is going to go down in history. Because we've never seen something quite like that. And the next time Bonzi stepped up to serve, he was just a completely different player than the guy who had built up this lead. He was so tight for the remainder of the third set. And it speaks to how poor Daniil is playing right now that even after that defining moment just flipped momentum on a dime, a match that had given no vibe that he had a pulse in the match to that point, he barely was able to get over the line in that third set and take advantage of, what a massive swing it had been momentum-wise. I felt there were opportunities for him to break at 6-5 after that. Even the tie-break, a couple of bad errors early. He went down a mini-break and then barely won the breaker 7-5. But that sort of fell to the backdrop for a while. I mean, Medvedev
proceeded to reel off 7 games in a row after winning the third set, going up a break out of the gates in the fifth, and it looked like Medvedev's antics were about to be the single driving force in carving out a victory for himself here, because at that point, not only was Bonzi rattled at the end of the third, but then into the fourth, it became a thing of, it looked like he just didn't have the legs anymore. Not sure what the problem was, but something just went off physically for him. His serve speed really, really tailed off for the remainder of the match, and again, given the outcome, isn't that, just fitting on brand for 2025 Daniil Medvedev, that even severely compromised Benjamin Bonzi was able to turn this around, and Medvedev goes up a break not once, but twice in this fifth set, and could not consolidate. And I do think once he gave back that first break, it kind of re-energized Bonzi that, okay, I'm still in this, and that led to just the will being there again to compete, and by proxy, rally a whole lot better serve aside. And yeah, it wasn't over at 3-all, but Medvedev blew a love 40 there, and 2 more breakpoints came Daniil's way, 5 in total loss in that game. Very gutsy effort from Bonzi throughout the entirety of the fifth, really, to stem the tide with how the momentum had, sort of cruelly been snatched away from him. But even more so in this particular game, a couple of really brave cuts at the ball to save a lot of these breakpoints. And once he came through that, the nightmare scenario for Daniil where, you created this distraction and really jankied the match up in a way that the match had completely flipped on its head, and now all of a sudden with a compromised opponent, the possibility was very real that he may still lose the match despite all of it. And well, that's exactly what happened. Because late in this match, another twist in the tail, Medvedev's hand started cramping up, and when he really needed it while serving to stay in the match, the quick points, the first serve, just did not come through for him. And yeah, you gotta tip the cap for Bonzi for maintaining composure through all this intense chaos and being able to overcome also his own body sort of tapping out late into that match as well. But like I said before, I believe I said rock bottom. This feels like real rock bottom for Daniil Medvedev on the flip side. And after the Wimbledon match, there was a lot of cope going on. And there's been a lot of cope going on throughout the course of this season for Daniil. I feel like it's sort of been that dog in a house on fire saying, this is fine, that meme. That's kind of the feel I've gotten from Medvedev throughout the course of this year. After the Wimbledon match with Bonzi, he was very nonchalant about it, said he thought Bonzi played out of his skis, and that he had just made the holofinal. And well, now there's no cope to be had. I mean, you saw Medvedev's reaction, just completely distraught after this match. And again, it felt like the culmination of the miserable year he's had. And yeah, at that point, just there being nowhere to hide, there not being a cope to be had. It felt like that realization just hit him in real time, and I do feel for him for that. But all in all, his behavior throughout the course of the match, not just egging on the crowd and creating this diversion, I feel like deliberately, but also the mocking of Bonzi, the comments to Allensworth, and then, just the meltdown afterwards, staying on court until like midway through Bonzi's interview. I think start to finish, I have not seen a case of more detestable behavior on a tennis court
since Nick Kyrgios lost his mind in Cincinnati against Kachanov in 2019. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. This was really, really bad. And listen, I believe Daniil Medvedev's a good guy. Big fan of his personality over the years, and I know a lot of people are. And that, along with how winning just seems to supersede everything, and Daniil Medvedev for a long time being a much better player, both those things have shielded him over the years for some real brat-like behavior, whereas a lot of other people would be crushed for some of the things he's done over the years. A lot of the times it just seems to get labeled as funny with Daniil. And yeah, I mean, this moment, it will always be tied to the story of the 2025 US Open. It was certainly a spectacle, but no part of Medvedev's behavior here was funny. And as he said, he expects some big fines, so he ought to be held accountable for it as well. But yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say on first round action. Real quick, let's just go over my bracket. I've already gone through my thoughts on a lot of the key players here, so we're not gonna go as thorough, but all in all, like I said, I think a real balanced draw here, especially in the top two seeds' paths. Fair share of obstacles for each Sinner and Alcaraz and their lead-ups to the business end of this tournament. Let's start with the Sinner Quarter. The names may not stick out here as much, but at least in the lead-up to the quarterfinal, I did feel like he had the toughest tests. And, turns out, midway through finishing the editing of this video, Jack Draper on day 4 has withdrawn from the US Open with his arm injury. I, of course, had him going to the quarterfinals. Worth noting that is no longer possible. But in the lead up to that quarterfinal, he could see Popyrin, then Shapo, then Paul or Bublik. Popyrin and Bublik both having a bit of an X factor if they're really redlining, I think, to actually potentially put up some form of resistance. Shapo, and the same goes for Felix, really, in his quarter, where he has Zverev potentially third round. Both of those guys haven't shown me that, they have the same type of dangerous upside to hang with the tier 1 player, even if they've found their pockets of success and decent wins throughout the course of this season. I just don't see them, at least to the same extent as those dangerous floaters that they could be, like 3-4 years ago. But, of course, Jannik Sinner is Jannik Sinner. We all expect him to still come through. And if he's playing really, really well, he may well come through, pretty easily. Draper didn't look great in his first round match. That was a real nip and tuck match for 3 sets. Only separated late. I would have loved to see how he could fare in a potential quarterfinal, measuring stick match with Sinner after he played him quite well in the semifinal last year. And up until Wimbledon, having such a strong season, seeing how far he's come since then. But, I don't know, it doesn't really look like we're going to get the best of 2025 Draper, even if he is to find his way to that quarterfinal. Musetti, while getting past Pecci Pericard, that was a danger match after the type of summer Lore has had. He's still vulnerable here on a quicker hard court, and that does make me sort of favor a Caboli. I think this is a great opportunity now for Caboli to make the quarterfinals and build on that Wimbledon quarterfinal run, as well as almost beating Ben Shelton in Toronto. Even though Flavio himself sort of played with fire in his first round match, had to win in 5. But it looks like there's a solid chance Draper might not be at his physical best, or just not be able to produce his best level if he is to make it that far somewhere down the line for Caboli. But yeah, nobody, and I mean nobody, is picking Sinner to lose here before the semifinals. Really just a matter of who is there to see him in the quarters, but Sinner is going to be through. The Zverev Quarter, I think things are looking up for Sasha Zverev. Again, like I said, I thought 1 and 2 have tougher draws than 3 and 4, and this is a good draw for Zverev. Rublev, a comfy matchup for him. Same with Kachanov, de Minaur, who he could see in the quarters. And all in all, his play, especially in Cincinnati, looks like it is really picking up again. Should be a solid favorite to get out of this quarter, I think. But I will say for Andrei Rublev, who I've said I'm really high on how he's been playing of late, while Zverev does have a hold on their matchup, Andrei has still beaten him 3 times, and, there's no Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic, or some of the players that Andrei has fallen to in the past in his inability to make it to that elusive semifinal of a Grand Slam. So if you look at it that way, kind of doable for him, but you wouldn't count on it. Otherwise, I think your potential quarterfinalists are pretty clear-cut, and I did shout out Tsitsipas a little bit for, he's in there with a puncher's chance now. We'll see just how well he's playing and what he can make of that, but you would think it still would come down between Khachanov and De Minaur, guys that are both in really good form again. I went with Karen Khachanov. He's playing well again, and as it is, that's a guy with experience going deep at majors, just the consummate professional. Fitness always is up to the task, pretty much. And of course, same could be said about Alex De Minaur, too. Could see either one being there, but I have Zverev through. Not really that complicated a section, I think. In quarter number 3, the Fritz/Djokovic Quarter. I know that was a point of contention on Twitter with the Tennis TV graphic, but yeah, for the most part, clear sledding, I think. Whoever's quarter you want to call it. Gave my thoughts for Novak. Wasn't expecting to be too high on him this US Open, and match fitness certainly seems like it's going to be a patchwork job along the way, if that first round's anything to go off of, but as the 7th seed, can't ask for much better of a draw. Honestly think round 4 is the match to circle. Potentially, I think a peaking Tiafoe or Holger Rune have probably the best opportunities to take advantage of potentially Djokovic still not being at his best. But I do think he clears that match, then he is headed to the semifinals. The archetype that Fritz falls under, the big hitter, big server, limited mover, it just has a long-standing history of not working against Novak Djokovic. Been a quiet couple of months for Jakub Mensik since winning the Miami title, but I did like him to make second week here. Like I said earlier, a world in which he or Mahac peaks to the high end of their abilities, I think is really the only way that Fritz doesn't reach the quarterfinal. Good draw for him as well. And he should be able to go even further, progress to the semi, if it's not Djokovic that he sees in the quarter. But yeah, like I alluded to when I was talking about Novak's round 1, I kind of just like this draw enough for him that he's going to be able to play his way into good enough form against a couple of guys that, fall in varying degrees of the mere mortal category of tennis player right now in the ATP Tour. So, of course, I had Djokovic over Fritz in the quarters. And then, of course, the Alcaraz Quarter at the bottom. Like I said before, didn't really think Carlitos is in any sort of real danger until the quarterfinals where his tournament starts. Obviously, in the meantime, it would be great if he keeps up, what he did in the first round and doesn't spend any more time on court than he needs to, like he did throughout the course of Roland Garros and Wimbledon. Conversely, dude who I think will meet him, Ben Shelton, playing great all summer. I think very much with a path to the quarterfinals that mimics a lot of his deep slam run draws. Guys that, in best of 5, Shelton can just sort of maneuver around. The only one that really sticks out to me is like a peaking Lehechka. But other than that, I think we are pretty well set up for Alcaraz Shelton in the quarterfinals. And with, Shelton Alcaraz at Roland Garros this year being the one match to this point in Ben's career where he's made these deep slam runs and run into, a tier 1 guy, their Roland Garros match this year was really the one to this point that Shelton was highly competitive in. Really good, fun match from start to finish. And with Ben evolving and now on the hard courts instead of clay. Whereas it is, you would favor hard courts for him, as well as Alcaraz probably being a little bit better on the clay than on hard courts to this point. I think Ben would be kind of live to make a match of that potential quarterfinal in a similar way to their Roland Garros match, if not push Alcaraz even more. Wouldn't rule out a five-setter there, but I really do get the feeling that Alcaraz is poised here to have his best run at the Open in a couple of years. All in all, it's no coincidence that he's had this string of great results since April. I think some of those technique improvements, the backhand, the serve, added weight on his racket as well, all of that, even if I don't think it had the immediate impact, definitely have all come around and really made their impact at some point or the other over the last 4 or 5 months. And all of that just makes for Carlos still in a place where he's just a better player than Ben. So I still feel pretty confident in him getting out of this quarter. Final weekend, Alcaraz over Djokovic. Don't think there's a way that Novak is physically going to be ready and fit enough to pull this one off, and just by default, I understand he's undefeated against Alcaraz on a hard court. I understand he beat him at the last hard court major, but I do think circumstances are different coming into this one, and, regardless, just with the age factor and Alcaraz being a generational player, unless we are at, Turin, I think you have to say Alcaraz is the favorite every time that these two are going to play. Novak is obviously no normal 38-year-old, but just by virtue of biology and how aging works, there's going to be diminishing returns. I will say, on the off chance that Novak is able to put it together on the fly, maybe this could work out for him, that he's only played 7 tournaments coming into the US Open, not as much mileage on the body at this point in the year as normal, which is normally what makes the US Open so tough for older players, but still, no tune-ups, and, last we saw him at Wimbledon, he ended up succumbing to injury midway through that tournament, not for the first time this season. It's all stuff you gotta keep in mind, and while I am aware this is a better matchup for Novak, certainly at this point in his career, than Sinner has been, and that will definitely, at the back end of a major, probably ensure the best version of Novak Djokovic that is possible under these circumstances if this match is to happen. I just can't see that version resembling something like what we got in Australia. It's too big of an ask, I think, and again, Carlos has gotten better since they met in Australia as well. This is, again, just a product of the age dynamic. Even within the year, Alcaraz will just continue to get better with time. And even if he doesn't, he's definitely in a place in his game right now where he's somewhere near his prime, entering his prime, if not it having already started at this point. And I just can't see Djokovic getting there to a point where he's ready like he was in Australia. And also, he just has that aura in Australia. He owns the place. And obviously those guys have been, training hard for the last month at least at that point. So I'd probably go Alcaraz over Djokovic in, a tight 4. Sinner Zverev seems more straightforward. I would be interested in just seeing how Zverev can match up at somewhere near his best. Obviously, like Medvedev before Sinner turned into this world-beating version of himself, he enjoyed a good matchup with Jannik, and it seemed like that would still continue last year when he played him super, super tight in Cincinnati, albeit Sinner not his sharpest throughout last year's Cincinnati event, and then this match only happened after that in Australia, where everybody was expecting a reasonably close match, and it was not. It was one-way traffic. Sinner comfortably the better player.
And I don't know that that's a reflection of the best that Zverev could offer up, even though you would still heavily favor Sinner. I would definitely be interested in seeing how that looks, and at this point, Zverev's playing a whole lot better. Hopefully, in a potential semi, he can make that happen, but you're definitely not betting against Jannik Sinner on a hard court for the sake of, like, Apex Zverev or really anybody else in this half. I would send Sinner through into the final over Zverev in 4, which, yeah, I mean, US Open final now, that's the question, right? Is it going to be Alcaraz for a 5th big event in a row? Will never not be funny to me that these two guys, were the best players in the world last year as well, but it took until Rome this year for them to contest their first big final. And yeah, in the 5 big events the 5 big events that they have entered into, because both skipped Canada, it has been the two of them contesting the finals. And here it feels like, you're just kind of looking for a reason for it not to happen, because it's the US Open, and of the 4 majors, the funkiest things out of left field have happened here. And that even including during, like, peak Big 3, Big 4 era. But, I just can't find a good enough reason for it not to happen here. Obviously, it being on hard courts, it being on a quicker hard court like the US Open it has been now for the last couple of years, you gotta favor Jannik Sinner going in. But if you've watched my last video, you will know that I'm a lot more optimistic right now than I was immediately after Wimbledon that Alcaraz can play disruptor here, because after Wimbledon, hearing that the next 2 slams are on hard courts, you feel like that's right up Jannik's alley. And he's nothing if not just, like, relentlessly consistent to put himself in the position to clean out pretty much every hardcourt event that he's entered over the last 2 years. Obviously, a quicker hardcourt as well swings the dynamics of this head-to-head more in Sinner's favor. We saw at Wimbledon, he was sort of just able to keep Alcaraz at bay throughout the course of that match, not really allow him to get all that creative. At which point, it just becomes really, really important, because Carlos has beaten Jannik that way before, going blow for blow. It's just not the ideal way to go about it, because Sinner's ball striking is right there, if not potentially tops among the all-time greats. But when it comes to that, like, Alcaraz just has to have a great forehand day, which he did not have throughout the course of really the entirety of Wimbledon. And that's what really stood out to me from Alcaraz's Cincinnati title run. I thought the last 2 matches in the quarter and the semi against Rublev playing awesome, and Zverev playing awesome for just over a set before illness just overwhelmed him the remainder of their match in Cincinnati. But in that snapshot, in his 2 most important matches of that title run, because obviously the final, it's sort of inconclusive what you can take away, but the 2 matches before, the Alcaraz forehand was in full flow, and I really, really liked how he looked in the most important moments of that Cincinnati title run, and it continued into the first round here at the US Open. And quietly also, Cincinnati put Alcaraz in a pretty terrific position to finish this year the world number 1. He's almost 2,000 points clear of Jannik at the conclusion of that event. In the Turin race, barring his year just hitting the wall like it did last year, which doesn't look to be the case this season, he's in great shape to reclaim number 1 for the first time since 2023 and potentially finish the year world number 1. And that's where I think this US Open is going to be so important, is that I think it probably is going to decide who the best player of the year was. It's, of course, been a truncated calendar for Jannik Sinner with that 3-month suspension through much of the spring. But if he can make it a 3-slam season, even without the same type of success outside the slams of 2024, I feel like he will take that all day,
even if, and this is a possibility, that he could win 3 slams and not finish the year number 1. And on the Alcaraz end of things, you've won so many trophies this year, been on such a spectacular run since April. I feel like, sort of mimicking outside the slams with it being on clay instead of the hard courts, and then carrying some of that over, winning Cincinnati. He's the one that has had this spectacular year outside of the Grand Slams, and if you can bag that second slam this year, firmly belongs to you. So, if you weigh both of those, I do think this is a more important tournament for Carlos Alcaraz. I think he comes in great form. U.S. Open, albeit last year, was the flash in the pan, bad loss at a slam for him, but it has been a good venue for him. You probably would like his chances better to play disruptor to Jannik Sinner on a hard court here than you would in Australia, where he's yet to clear the quarters. I think he has displayed that high-end level that he would need to play disruptor, and it's not just relying on, big match. He will probably rise to the occasion. No, we have seen it. Obviously, if the match comes about, I would delve more into X's and O's, but yeah, Carlos Alcaraz is my pick to win this U.S. Open. Probably go Alcaraz over Sinner in 5. Just with that being the typical Alcaraz route to victory and physicality, getting the match in the trenches, favoring the Spaniard more. But obviously, Jannik Sinner is the favorite. He is the guy right now that sits atop the hard court throne. I totally understand why. At least I get the feeling that he is not the overwhelming favorite, but has seemingly been the most popular pick by a noticeable margin, I would say. But yeah, those are my predictions as well as my round 1 US Open recap. If the first round is anything to go off of, something crazy will happen imminently. We'll talk soon again. But until then, thank you all again so much for watching. And of course, I will see y'all in the next one.